When I say the words Appalachian cooking, I think most people have a fairly simple version of what they think Appalachian cooking is, typically equating it with Southern food. But you see, that does Appalachia a great disservice. Because Appalachia, yes, while in the deep south, extends all the way through the central part of our country and up north. Each of these regions will be impacted by the native groups that once and still do call this place home, and the different groups of immigrants that go to each region throughout American history, bringing their own flavors and traditions and stories to the mountains. This is why I find Appalachia so interesting personally, because things like history, language, tradition, and food can all vary from mountain to mountain or cove to cove. However, there does seem to be two major themes that go throughout Appalachian cooking. And the number one is the seasonality of it and what the mountain can provide. Many Appalachians today still hunt, grow their own personal gardens, all as a way to subsidize their foods that they are feeding their family. And honestly, with inflation being like it is, how many of us are already considering doing that again? But the other main factor is the love and tradition that is found on the plate. In my family, it was the women who cooked and cared for us that way. That was their physical demonstration of love. They used the mystic fires, sometimes literally, to produce healthy, flavorful foods for their families. My name is Kelly White Bateman. I'm known on several apps as Historically ADHD. And will you join me in this first episode of Baccalachia as we look through the mystic fires and see the sweet emotion that you can find on a plate? When I decided to look specifically at the food of Appalachia, I had to think really hard about where to start because there are a plethora of books out there, research papers, all done on the different foods of Appalachia and the culture surrounding it. I'm very lucky in that aspect. But I decided, since we are heading into fall at the time of this recording, that we'll do a fall dish. And not really just a fall dish, a mythical fall dish. Kelly, what do you mean there's a mythical dish of Appalachia? Well, you see, that's what makes Appalachia so complicated, is that for some, this dish is something they've never even heard of. This dessert, are you for real? What is that? I've never heard of that. Whereas thankfully in my family, it's something we had heard of. We used a slightly different name for it, but thank God we do have this. My great grandmother made it. So, what mythical food am I summoning to the plate? Why, it is the Appalachian apple stack cake, or as we called it in my family, stack pie, when my great grandmother made it. Now, they had a tree on their farm, and they would take the apples and dry them out, make apple butter, and my grandmother would make this cake or pie for her kids, and it was a big treat. Now, the reason why there's so much folklore and legend around it is because became popularized as an Appalachian wedding cake. The idea being when times were hard, like during World War II, perhaps, and you had a very hard time getting your hands on flour, each part of the family, when coming to the celebration, each person could make a layer of the cake. And when you got together, you sort of take your apple butter and then you put your cake, apple butter cake, and you could stack it together, and everybody sort of helps share the cost together. But our concept of wedding cakes and the way that we view weddings is highly influenced by the Victorian era. Like before that, the wedding cake as we know it really wasn't quite a thing. So you have to take some of this stuff with a grain of salt. But fortunately, I am from the part of Appalachia where this exists, and I get to tell you about it and how hard it can be to make. So, what actually makes a stack cake or stack pie? I'm going to give you the anatomy of a stack cake real quick. Number one, you're going to have at least 5 layers of a very thin cookie. In between those cookie layers, you are going to have a fruit flavor filling, such as apple butter, the apple filling. Now, after you've stacked all those layers and you're feeling really fancy, you can create a pretty powdered sugar design on top if you would like. But honestly, these cakes are typically served fairly plain looking. Trust me, there is more than meets the eye to this particular cake. You give it about 12 hours of sit time and then you cut into it. I swear to God, it will melt in your mouth and it will be gone so quick in your home. So, the goal of each one of these podcast episodes is to explore and learn deeper something about Appalachian heritage and culture. And particularly this time, my own Appalachian heritage and culture in the form of a cuisine. So, I had to recreate this cake from my grandmother's childhood, and that presents its own problems. The challenge is my great grandma Norton had been cooking probably from the time that she could hold a spoon. She had been taking care of her family, feeding them, clothing them since she was 14 years old and her mother got sick. So to say she was an intuitive cook is an understatement. She could just tell when things looked right, especially in baking, which, if you ever tried to navigate recreating a baking recipe, can be very, very, very challenging. Thankfully, my grandmother was here a couple weeks with me when I was doing these experiments, and she was able to help and guide me. We discussed what kind of apples they used, how the look and feel should be, and what she remembers her mother doing. And then we turned to a bunch of different books to try to figure out what apple stack cake recipe would be closest to what my grandmother remembered. We went through a lot of books. Thankfully, we found one clear winner. We found a winner, and that winner is Celebrating Southern Appalachian Food Recipes and Stories from Mountain Kitchens by Jim Casada and Tipper Presley. Really good book. You should check it out. It also has a glossary of terms so you can understand why my family and I were so struggling. When you say a dash of this or pinch of that, it doesn't really exactly translate into a scientific measurement. One challenge I was not prepared for was trying to find out the kind of apples my great grandmother used to make her apple stack pie. And my grandma Reese said that they were as large as horse heads. That these apples, and that's what they called them. They were really good for baking, and they were green, and sometimes they would have like a little blush to them, a little bit of red to them. And I Google internet searched the crap out of horse head apples or horse apples, and the return I got was not good. Thankfully, I have a friend. Alexandria Artifact, as you probably know her on TikTok and Instagram, happens to run a farm on an Appalachian mountainside, and she actually grows horsehead apples. And she was able to send me a link to the heritage tree site that discusses these apples. It's really, really cool. They're really, really rare. They were brought to North Carolina, they believe, before the 1800s and became very popular in Appalachia because they were fairly hardy and easy to grow, and they were great baking apples. So thank you, Alexandria. What would I do without you? All right, it's time to gear up and get ready to cook an apple stack cake. Here's a quick oversight of our list of ingredients. The recipe we chose that worked the best called for dried apples, and we got these apples from a particular fancy grocery store that hails from Buffalo, New York. But we had plenty, plenty of apple butter left over for like 2 jars after we got done making the cake. So just these 2 bags was plenty. Now, to create the apple butter filling, I needed to rehydrate these apples. And to do that, I used my largest cooking pot. Now, these apples, once we add some water, they're going to start looking really good. Trust me. To sweeten up our apples, we're going to start off by adding a half a cup of white sugar to the mix. We will then add a cup of brown sugar, cinnamon, and the allspice. And I personally just like to mix up the ingredients that way when I pour it into the apple mixture, it's all mixed up. I don't have to worry about mixing it up even further. In the cooking pot with the apples, you're going to want to add enough water to sort of just come up to where the apples are sort of floating in the water. Also keep some extra water around because as you're cooking this stuff, the water will cook out and down, and you don't want these to burn. We want them to turn into something nice and soft as you mix in the sugar and the sugar mixture to make the apple filling. And this is what it looks like after it's been cooking for a while, but it's not done yet. Now for the cake. For the cake, you're going to first cream together your shortening, which is half a cup of shortening and half a cup of sugar to start your cookie base. We're now going to add our egg, breaking it in a separate bowl just in case we get a shell. You are now going to mix in a third cup of sorghum syrup and half a cup of buttermilk. And let's not forget our teaspoon of vanilla. Then in another bowl, you're going to add in all your dry ingredients, your flour, your baking soda, salt, and ginger. Now, I personally prefer to use King Arthur brand flour. It is 100% employee owned. And that sort of thing is a rare find in the United States these days. So go out and support it when you can. Now, with your dry ingredients, you're going to scoop out a little well to start slowly adding in your wet ingredients. So instead of thinking this as cake batter, think of it better as cookie dough because you are going to be rolling it out and using it as sort of like a cookie layer within the cake. Once your batter reaches a cookie dough like consistency, you're going to try to evenly scoop out each layer you're going to create. On my cookie sheet, I drew a circle and I'm now using a rolling pin to roll out the dough to create the circle before it goes in the oven. I did use a knife to sort of like trim up the edges and make it look as circular as possible, but you do not have to stress out about it. It does not need to be a perfect circle. But what it does need to be is about 9 inches around, and it needs to be as thin as you can stand it. You don't want it to be too thin because you don't want it to break and crack, but you want it to be thin enough that the moisture from the apples can soak through to the cake. Then you're going to pop in each layer into a preheated oven of 350 degrees, allowing it to cook till it's like light and golden brown around the edges, which should be about 10 to 12 minutes, depending on your oven. While that cooks, you will now see that my apple mixture is looking good. I will now use a stick blender to smooth it out so that there's no rough, chunky pieces when they go to bite into the cake. And then again, that is totally optional. You can use a blender to smooth it out if you don't have a stick blender, or you can just leave it chunky and just bash it up a little bit with whatever spoon you're using to sort of smooth it out. It's up to you and what you and your family like. Now, with our cake done, it is time to assemble. I start with a cookie base and then I add one layer of the apple butter slash filling. And then I continue to do it with a second layer and then a third layer, and then a fourth layer, all piling up to be about 6 layers in this particular stack cake. And there is my stack cake. She doesn't look like she's going to win any beauty awards, but trust me when I say the taste that is from this cake is mind blowing. How complex the flavor is for such a simple cake, and you will want to eat it all in one setting. A question I have been grappling with over the past 2 weeks working on this project, finishing it up, is why release this now? My country is without a doubt in incredible turmoil. America is living through a post truth moment. It's not the first one we've ever lived through, but it is a scary one nonetheless. My great grandmother raised children during the Great Depression and World War II and Vietnam. Her world was chaotic and scary, especially during the Great Depression and World War II. You had to go without. A lot of things had to be given up. But one thing she could do for her children to provide a little bit of hope and comfort was allow them to be kids, allowing them to enjoy a simple dessert that she was able to make with what she had growing on her own farm. She was able to give a little bit of normalcy to her kids. And I think that's the important thing here. When we're dealing with all this stuff that's going on in the world, we need to remember that this isn't the first time society has ever been in trouble. It isn't the first time that American parents have had to deal with challenges, or parents anywhere have had to deal with challenges. And so what this episode means to me is it shows the love that a mother can bring to the table, or a father, or any sort of parent, or any sort of loved one in these dark times, to sort of keep some normalcy, to keep some hope, and maybe, just maybe for a moment, emotionally protect our children from the outside world, because we can't protect them forever. It's gonna get in. But for a brief moment, maybe we can give them and ourselves a little bit of respite. My name is Kelly White Bateman. I'm known as Historically ADHD, and thank you for watching Baccalachia, The Return Home. If you found this video slash podcast interesting, please like and subscribe. Give me a follow. I'm known on several apps as Historically ADHD. My main focus has been on Substack, but I'm starting to branch out a little bit more. If you have any thoughts or questions or ideas involving the history of Appalachia or the culture and the traditions, please feel free to comment below, ask a question. I also do a lot of the history of North Carolina, and I'm starting to branch out to do the history of my new home, Virginia. So I look forward to sharing more educational, fun information with you. My name is Kelly Marie White Bateman, and I am Historically ADHD. Thank you.